Hello, good afternoon, and good morning, depending upon where you are dialing in the world. Pleased to have you join us for the first in our three-part summer shape-up series looking at digital and social media communications. Really quickly, just to cover some administrative activities at the beginning of our session here. This is an audio-only session, so if you're calling in from a phone, please mute your phone. If you have any issues with the audio coming through your computer while you're listening, please feel free to shoot us a question. Other bit of administration, you may submit questions at any time in the Q&A response at the lower left-hand corner. We will address some of these as we go through the session as well at the end of it. And then also note there will be a couple of polls that we will ask during today's session, so we invite you to participate in those as well. And then finally, if you look at the 4 X's in the upper right-hand corner, that's what you can use to expand or minimize the size of the screen in front of you. So with that out of the way, welcome everyone, and it's a pleasure to have the opportunity to talk to you today. I'm Steve Halsey. I'm one of the principals here of G&S and Managing Director of our business consulting practice, which really focuses on helping align the business strategies with communication strategies at a range of business-to-business and consumer clients. I'm joined with one of our digital superstars here, Jeri Moore. Jeri has a particular specialty in paid search and paid social. She is a graduate from the Ohio State University and a certified Google Analytics expert. Jeri, welcome to today's session.
Hey, Steve. How are you?
I am doing good. We've got a very interesting mix of attendees for us here today, Jeri. We have quite a range of business-to-business, business-to-consumer companies mixed throughout the states, even some from Latin America. A lot of directors of marketing, directors of communications, marketing managers. So it looks like we've got a mix and a fairly senior audience with us here today interested in learning more about how we can really use social media, and particularly in this case, paid search and advertising, to really help move their businesses forward. As we look at the three-part series, as I mentioned, today is about strategies for strengthening your paid search and social advertising, where Jeri will be our trainer. Next week, we're looking at integrating social media into broader communications plan. And finally, we wrap up the series in 3 weeks with Build This, Not That, How to Reshape Your Website from Flabby to Fit. So with this theme, I thought it was only appropriate to start with what I think really are 4 good keys to digital fitness, and this will be played out in the series. First is to make sure you're really setting goals that are tangible, whether that be lead generation, whether that be actually getting control of your digital or social media, but really setting those goals up from the beginning, working with our trainers to make sure people are learning the proper techniques, the importance of measurement and analytics, which we can do to a greater degree that we've never been able to do before in digital and social media, and really staying focused. Quickly about us, G&S, we are based here in Manhattan, which is where I'm talking to you from today. We have offices in Chicago, where Jeri is in Raleigh and Basel, Switzerland. We've been around since 1971, more than 150 of us. And through our different partnerships, we offer in-country, in-language communications in more than 50 different companies. So let's get started in terms of building this up. And, you know, Jeri, I go back a little bit longer in communications than you do. And when I started out, along with, I'm guessing, a lot of our attendees here today, the primary role of corporate communications or marketing communications was really on earned media. You know, how do we get third parties such as newspaper reporters, broadcast reporters to talk about us? And that really has been a core crux of where things were at. You added into that the advent of the internet becoming more mainstream. We took our brochures online and we created websites, and that gave us the component of owned media. As social media came up and we started doing more discussions and dialogue, the share component came into play as well. But, traditionally paid was just the realm of traditional advertising, be it print or TV. And we've gone through a bit of a shaking out over the past few years as to where does paid media fit. And I think the reality of where we're falling is pretty much every campaign in any industry, again, be it business to consumer or business to business, really is a compilation of the pay-so elements, the paid, earned, shared, owned, and it's really not an option to have paid anymore. So what Jeri's going to really focus with us today is how can we really integrate that into a communications campaign? How can you leverage some of the content that you already have? What are some of the costs for these things, and how does it play out over channels? But first, I wanted to ground us a little bit with a couple of definitions. First obvious question is, well, what is paid search? So according to Technopedia, paid search really refers to any type of remuneration or advertising that helps raise your profile in terms of where your company or your keywords or your phrases fall in a search engine such as Google, Bing, Yahoo, any of those from that standpoint. And a lot of people associate paid search with a more classic pay-per-click, which you see in banner advertising, which is a good frame of reference but isn't completely accurate. The second definition is social advertising. Social advertising is different than paid search because in this case, you're paying for sponsored posts or sponsored tweets. You're inserting yourself in the feeds and into the conversation of the individuals that you're trying to reach. And what I think is fascinating is if you look in the lower right-hand corner here, nearly a quarter of all digital ad spend these days is spent more for branding, more so than performance. And we're going to talk about that a little bit as we go through today. But we're also going to talk about how paid social shouldn't just be about branding. It should be bringing leads into what you're trying to do. And then finally, I think it's worth noting that one of the most cynical groups about advertising, the millennials who have grown up with it, understand that if they've got good content, they will click on it, even understanding that it is paid from that standpoint. So, Jeri, I wanted to get a little reaction from your standpoint as we get going here. Some of the context that I see here is, these numbers are amazing. $60 billion in net ad revenues from Google last year. You look at, of the social advertising spend, almost 3/4 of it is on Facebook. But yet you're looking at somebody like LinkedIn, and sponsored content is almost 60% of their revenue. So what's going on here, and how do we need to think about paid search and paid social within the context of more traditional communications?
Yeah, I think that's a great point, Steve. And I like, the graphic because it really does, on the left, it pulls your eye to Facebook. One thing, to note about Facebook is that it does have the most active users of the channels. Even though LinkedIn was founded and launched prior to Facebook, it still has more users. We're talking more than 1.5 billion. So compared to Twitter and LinkedIn, who just have more than 300 million. So the sheer volume of people on the platform is, kind of astonishing in itself, and is why I'm not surprised to see that it has the leading ad revenue share there. When I think about LinkedIn, the sponsored content, it's naturally woven into a user's feed, which is what you just mentioned in talking about the definition of social. And the channel itself is set apart from the others because it's focused on career and professional networking. So it's an entirely different space for users, where Facebook, it's about connecting with your friends, maybe past colleagues, your children, your grandchildren, your grandparents. And it's based on, a different set of behaviors and interests than is LinkedIn. So I'm definitely not surprised to see these numbers. And I would hope that LinkedIn, does make this pie chart, one day, because there's some really, really valuable stuff there.
So I think as we talk through the session, I think it's going to be very interesting because traditionally I've seen either just discussion about really how do you boost your search rankings or how do you work with social media. And we're going to try and actually tackle both of those. So it's going to be interesting to see how this holistic way of thinking works out. But I also want to get your reaction to this slide as well. And
Yeah,
this is a little bit more pertinent to our B2B audience, looking at LinkedIn, Twitter, and Facebook, particularly this notion of usage versus effectiveness. Could you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, exactly. First, I want to call out that this accounts for all content, not just paid content. So the graphic that we're looking at is asking respondents when they're distributing content to B2B marketers, how are they, if they're using it, what's the effectiveness of that? So we're not just, sparsing out the paid piece. So I think that's a key component here. And when I look at this, I think about the slide that we just saw, and that Facebook does have the majority of the revenue share, but the effectiveness is not where Twitter or LinkedIn is. I think, again, LinkedIn having such information about users based on their job title and where they work, that effectiveness is key because you can tailor your communications to exactly who you're trying to reach. Where Facebook and Twitter are, a little bit more based on what type of information you include in your profile. So for me, I think it's surprising to not see Facebook as number one, just because people do spend a lot of the ad dollars there, but maybe this opens the eyes, for a communicator of, being open to LinkedIn or Twitter.
So yeah, and I think one of the things that based on some of the questions I'm already seeing coming in here is really to explore that point, looking at usage versus effectiveness. And again, this is really showing that as you look at your different channels and as you think back to some of those earlier points, there may be some activities that you would want to do that's purely for branding activities, which is where Facebook may come into some of these campaigns. Whereas if you're looking for more leads and conversions, something like LinkedIn may be a more appropriate fit. So it'll be interesting to have that discussion. But, when I showed you my definition of paid search and paid social, you said that's not enough. So you want to tell us a little bit about your definition of digital advertising?
Yeah, absolutely. So this is a combination of various definitions of digital advertising. And, for me, the things that pop out are, things I'm used to seeing, which are media and internet and consumers, social, search, along with engine, of course, and content. But it's not limited to those items. So even though today we are talking about paid search and social, I don't want to, omit email and display and banners and digital billboards and even digital refrigerators. All of those are components of digital advertising, and they can all be used collectively, for your communications plan. But yeah, I think it encompasses more than just those two, and you can, strategize for each channel in their own way. But yeah, it's interesting to think about, these different elements. And Steve, you mentioned the polls, and I'm going to go to our poll here just to see where our attendees are allocating the most of their budget. I'm very curious to know if it's in that display and banner area, maybe paid search, paid social, or last but not least, remarketing or retargeting.
So as I see that people are starting to put their polls in, can you just give a quick definition of remarketing and retargeting?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great question. I feel that people use these interchangeably. Remarketing is specific to Google AdWords display network. That's what kind of spawned the word. Retargeting is the marketing approach behind remarketing. We also use these a lot in email when you want to remarket someone via email. So I feel it's fine to use either term, but retargeting is truly when you're going to follow someone's behavior throughout the internet and retarget them at a later point in time.
Great. Well, it looks like we've got a number of results in here, and this is fascinating. I wasn't anticipating this mix. We have 100% of those responding that are on this call say paid social is part of their program. So definitely we have a savvy audience looking at that. But what I find surprising is I was expecting the numbers to be higher for the more traditional components such as paid search or display. What's kind of your take on that?
I agree, Steve. I'm extremely happy to see that people are allocating budget to paid social and really getting in there and probably testing it and figuring out how to use it for their own, communication goals and objectives. So I'm extremely happy to see that. But like you, I am surprised. So maybe, I will touch on a couple of points for retargeting. So maybe that'll spawn some ideas for our attendees. So I guess today, my goal is to really, provide tips for tightening up these strategies and campaigns for paid social. So, looking at some of the channels we've already talked about, so Facebook, Google, LinkedIn, and Twitter at the top here, those are going to be the ones that I focus on. These are the predominant channels in the Americas and established for the B2B space. So know that if you're not in North America, these are still applicable to you. Some of the newer channels, like maybe Snapchat, for instance, they may not be in all countries yet, but are probably likely to do so as all the other channels have followed suit. But as we, I think there are certainly others, again, out there, but we're going to focus on the top four because those are the main ones for now.
Great.
In the B2B space. So when we, talk about budgeting for paid search and social, you really have to understand the differences between Google, the paid search element, and then the social channels in targeting users based on interests and behaviors. So to think about Google, it allows communicators to advertise at the very moment a customer searches for keywords or phrases. And there's many variables to that cost. So we talk about industry, geography, and even your account history. So if by chance you haven't launched an AdWords program through Google, it's very key to start healthy because over time your account history is going to go into your ultimate cost for your ads. The intent here, I think, is really important for Google. When you think about keywords and phrases that people search on Google every day, which there are billions of searches done, 2 billion 2 trillion every year, actually. They just upped that. So crazy amount of searches going on. And there's all types of different intent behind them. So we talk about an awareness, someone who doesn't quite know what they're looking for, maybe looking for more information. Someone who maybe knows the product or brand that they're searching for. That's a different intent. And maybe someone who's ready to buy, so they are already at the lower end of that funnel. Does that make sense, the intent piece, Steve?
I think so. As you're really looking at that side, you're really viewing it from the standpoint of really how do you optimize that search and draw them into the story, right?
Right, exactly. And you really want to match your ad and your call to action to that person. So you want to make it as relevant as possible. So it's nice to decipher what that intent is, and you typically do that up front through keyword research. So on the other side, when we look at social channels, Facebook, Twitter, and LinkedIn, we look at more demographics, the interests, behaviors, and content that they follow. So, take into account age, whether or not they like sports, what sports teams do they like, where, it gets very, very specific in some cases. So even B2B, people do list their titles and the industries that they work for, or if they own a certain company in a certain industry. Facebook does have that information. So it's nice to go through the advertising platform because you're able to target people that way. Mm-hmm. The content really comes into play for Twitter and LinkedIn. So when we're talking about Twitter, you are following certain handles, and that's an indicator that you're interested in that type of content. So specifically media handles. A lot of users do follow industry news. So if we're interested in reaching someone, there's an opportunity there to target someone based off of a handle that they follow.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think one of the things that'll be interesting is again, as you talk through this, how do you really blend those different mental activities of going out and searching for something and then really being engaged in a conversation. And as you're showing here, there's a multiple of other factors that come into play too.
Right, exactly. And, the shared opportunities for these are targeting someone by their device, their language, which is really key for people in other countries, location, and engagement. Talking about language real quick, I think one small way to tighten up a program is to go through your current campaigns. And if you are in the U.S. and you're targeting U.S. individuals, some people forget to add a language. And it's really important to add either English or Spanish or any other language, even if you're targeting the U.S., because, it's a blend of people. And so we do want to be clear on who we're trying to reach. If your ad copy is in English, you should be targeting people that have indicated that they speak and read English. So I think that's one way, like these little tiny ways to tweak it. And one example I wanted to share with everyone is I had a client who had a scholarship, and we actually targeted users on both. And that's, an optimal way to do this is to reach people who are searching for scholarships on Google, but then also indicate maybe the school that they attend or the program that they're actually in at school. Mm-hmm. And so you're reaching someone who's searching for a scholarship as well as indicating, I actually go to this school and I'm an undergrad, or I'm going to be an undergrad. So you're using both components together.
Great. Hey, and as we go through the rest here, I've noticed that a few more people have answered the poll. It hasn't fundamentally shifted it. It still is predominantly paid search followed by display, banners, then paid search and remarketing. So I think those are just good things to keep in mind as you think about how you blend traditional with the newer channels.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I appreciate you calling that out too. That's good stuff to see here. As we, talk about hitting the right channel for the right audience, I wanted to call out some advantages of these. Google obviously has a wide network and a ton of volume being done every day on the engine. They do have a lot of partnerships with other sites, even including Facebook. So, and something I don't think people tend to realize, especially B2B communicators. So if by chance you are running ads on Google and you are using the display network, you probably should take a look through the list of sites. There tends to be some apps in there. There can be gaming sites, and Facebook can even be included. So if you then are running ads on Facebook too, you might want to take a look and see, which channel would be best, and, omit Facebook from your Google display. Mm-hmm. There are also simple ads. Users are used to them. They do kind of change every so often, but traditionally they've stayed the same in the actual view of a search engine results page. And then optional extensions. Not every advertiser just wants someone to click through to their website. Perhaps you need a customer to click to call someone, maybe a rep. And in that case, there is an extension for that. And there's, a few others that are applicable through Google. So definitely take a look at those extensions. Mm-hmm. Facebook, an abundance of user information. As I already alluded to, people will put, kind of almost anything on Facebook and in terms of what they're interested in. And there's multiple formats for Facebook. So, we talk about traditional ads that are maybe on the right-hand rail, and those are, still standing. But now we've got something new like a carousel ad where we're asking individuals to swipe through different pictures and, engage with us a little bit more. So I really like that they offer, variations. Twitter has a strong media and corporate leadership presence. As I mentioned before, on Twitter, you're able to target specific handles and specific users on Twitter. And I think that is, a great thing for communicators to realize that, they can actually target even competitors if they wanted. So that would mean we're targeting a competitor handle by actually reaching out to all of their followers. So that's an advantage too, where no one would know that you're targeting a competitor handle, but you're reaching their followers. And that, again, should be based on that content and having it be relevant. Mm-hmm. And then LinkedIn, more than 400 million professionals on the channel. Obviously, you can reach key decision makers because you know the titles of people, you know where they work. So, with that, I think it's good to have a baseline for the costs. That's how you build a budget, right? I have clients who come to me with a budget and ask what, how to best, how to strategize to use it and what's the best way to, kind of delve it out into the different channels. And then I also have clients who don't have a budget and have no idea what the cost is. So I thought this would be a good idea to share the average cost per click across all industries. And just want to make sure, everyone knows this is both B2B and B2C, so it's not, just drilled down to B2B. So we can
go ahead, I can see some parallels to one of your earlier slides then when we were talking about overall use versus really the effectiveness that LinkedIn and Twitter. You can really see how that plays out, that in Facebook you're getting a lot more visibility, but the cost is down because I guess it's not as targeted. On the flip side, you look at something like LinkedIn, and those numbers are significantly higher. So to your point, it really does require more than just saying, hey, we're going to allocate monies per channel, but really thinking about that strategy and how you want to leverage it best for business impact.
Exactly. You hit it right on the head, Steve. I mean, LinkedIn is a great channel, and that's, where I hope B2B professionals can find it useful for them, but it does come at a cost. So when you're building a budget, you do need to understand this. If you have $1,000 to spend on a campaign, how far is that going to get you? And so that's where, kind of a mix of the right channel, but also who you're trying to reach, and just setting those expectations up front. To your point about setting a goal that's tangible, right? We need to be sure that, going into something, we're not expecting, a higher return than what is even achievable. So I did want to call out, though, the B2B average. This is what, here at G&S we've seen for our client campaigns. $1.25 on Google, 54 cents on Facebook, $1.71 on Twitter, and just a little bit more than, $6 on LinkedIn. So it does fall in line with that. And, I will be honest and say we've had campaigns that have been higher than the average from across all industries. And that's okay. It just depends on what your goal is and, how much you're asking a user to do for you. That's always, taken into account too.
Jeri, we have a question from one of our attendees. What accounts for that typical variance you see in like the Google, in like in Twitter from that standpoint between kind of your B2B average and just your composite? Basically, their question is, shouldn't B2B be more expensive since it's more targeted?
Sure. That's a great question. So when I will separate Google from the social channels in this context. For Google, there's a ton of variables, and I would say most importantly, it's the keywords that you are bidding on. That really sets the tone for it. So if you're in a competitive space, like the tech industry, you're probably going to pay higher because it's very competitive. So the amount of advertisers competing for a keyword or phrase definitely goes into that. Secondly, I mentioned earlier your account history. If you have in the past haven't had a great experience on Google to your users, which means if maybe you were bidding on keywords that weren't exactly relevant to what you were providing, then you're going to get dinged for that, and your cost can ultimately actually be higher than what it should be and what competitors are paying because you've had that built-up history of not bidding on relevant keywords. So they take into account a user's behavior once they click through on your ad, and we need to make sure that that landing page experience is what they expect. So, for instance, if you're bidding on, a phone service, then for a company, then you should be providing them with information about your, what you can offer them. It shouldn't lead a user to, a computer software service, something that's completely different, because the intent, again, is there.
Looks like budget's kind of the hot topic here, Jeri. It actually sets up your next question for the group, the next poll you had, fairly well.
Yeah, it does actually. So I'll put this poll out here. What percentage, will digital advertising account for your 2017 communications plans? And while people are answering this, I will address the social side. So what kind of affects that budget? It's definitely the audience that you're going after. So if you are targeting U.S. Wide, you're talking about a broad audience. And so if you have a tight budget, you're going to want to narrow that down. Maybe target markets that would be either ones that you're trying to go after or ones that would, obviously benefit from the service or product that you're offering. So that can kind of play into it. And also just length of time too. So if we're talking about, 6 months versus 2 days, those campaigns, the budgets are going to look different.
And speaking of budgets, as we have these questions come in, it looks like we're seeing a pattern established here that it looks like roughly about 70% of our attendees basically have less than 10% of their budget available for digital advertising. We've got about 14% that say 25. And then we have a couple outliers here that are saying more than 75%. So it looks like in those cases they may be making the most of their limited budget by focusing on digital more so than traditional communications. What do you see from these numbers? Are they fairly typical from what you see in terms of dollar allotments for digital advertising versus the rest of the comm spend?
Yeah, Steve, I would agree. I was going to guess number one or number two, so right around that 25 or less answer. So, I'm happy to see that there are a couple people who are spending more than 75. That's great. But, with this, you'll have a different strategy with less than 10% of a budget. So I think as we look to, help the communicators, decide what to do with that small budget, I think that, talking about the different opportunities and how you can strategize, will be helpful. So, here I kind of put my thought process down on paper. So when I'm talking to a client, especially with a small budget, there's different approaches. And I would say for this group, it's probably going to be the first, which is low and slow. Long term, it would be a campaign that would probably be, 6 to 9 months maybe, something that needs steady visibility. And that can, almost run in the background, maybe switching in and out content, that could be a possibility. But it could be for lead generation or opt-in campaigns for an email or an e-newsletter, or like I said, evergreen content that could run at any time. Because you're going to want, it's kind of stretching that dollar, right? So if you plan to run for 6 months and you set it up and you're pacing it correctly, and just because it's getting so much traffic and volume, and let's say you run out in 4 months, there's nothing wrong with that. It can still be a successful campaign if you can't make it the full 6 months. But you were actually, trying to get, as much visibility as possible for, a duration that would be acceptable for the campaign. And then on the other side, for people who do have, a nice budget, you can do a fast and accelerated. So naturally, to get, short-term, quick visibility, you're going to need to set a higher threshold for, a daily spend. And, budgets are broken down in that way typically. You take a full campaign budget and you slice it, to the day to see kind of how to pace something. And so trade shows, events, crisis management, time-sensitive content, those are areas where a fast and accelerated campaign would be really beneficial. You want to hit the market hard. You want to alert people of, this crisis, for instance.
And I have a question that's falls a little bit in kind of the gray area here. So the question is, if I have a limited budget, am I better off focusing on fewer channels to stretch my dollar, or should I plan on a shorter time frame to run my ads?
Excellent question. I absolutely would recommend focusing and limiting your channels. When you splice a budget into 2 channels, you are already knocking that visibility down. So typically, I have a client actually who has been able to run on both channels, Facebook and Twitter, at certain times when they've had the budget to allow for it. But when they don't, they've found more success on Facebook. So therefore, I'm able to recommend immediately that we run our ads on Facebook. If you don't quite have that knowledge yet, I would recommend testing both channels in, making that smaller, the budget, decreasing the amount of time, but being able to test both channels, I think might be beneficial for you. If you have to go off of sheer dollar, looking at the grid that we saw before, Facebook is probably going to be cheapest. But of course, it does matter what results you end up seeing.
And then, Jeri, looking at the opposite end there, for our friends that have more than 75% of their available budget focused, what type of cadence do they need to do as they look at it over the year? Do you try and just keep an even number of momentum, or do you kind of try and do something almost like a sine wave that has a typical cadence, or do you think about things like trade shows and product launches and save all the big bang for there? When you have a really big budget, how does that change your thinking about low and slow versus fast and accelerated?
Another great question. For me, if I have ample budget, I'm going to think of both of these. So there are instances like a product launch or entering a new market or offering a new service where you need both. You want, a full year's worth of exposure and awareness because you're offering something new or entering a new market and people don't know of you. But you also probably have certain events or time-sensitive things. An announcement, right? If you are distributing releases to the press, maybe you're doing interviews, things like that, to coincide with those elements, you could also do a short, quick-hitting social campaign too, and then follow it up with the low and slow. That's typically what I recommend doing, and again, thinking holistically with what your objectives and goals are for the campaign as a whole, not just paid.
Great. Have another question here that I think will be right down your alley. It says here, my question is, I'm spending a lot of money creating more traditional communications content. How can I leverage that in my paid search or paid social campaign?
Yes. I think that's a great question, and does actually lead me to the next section here about leveraging content for paid ads. So, what I typically recommend is, with a tight budget, take a look at the assets that you have and figure out how to, use them on a new channel. So, kind of a best practice, for Twitter and Facebook is to not post the exact same content on both channels and make it relevant to the Twitter audience and then, relevant to Facebook audience. So, for instance, including hashtags in Twitter where you wouldn't in Facebook because people don't use them the way that they do in Twitter. So just like that little finite tweak can definitely help you and amplify your visibility in certain channels. I find one challenge that people come to me with is having the limited budget and producing content or creative for ads. So I want to show some examples here, to kind of walk through my thought process for this. So the series of examples that you're going to see are all organic examples. So all of these businesses have business pages or profiles on Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, and I came across these through my own feed and thought, what I would do for this piece is this. So that's kind of how we're going to go about a couple of these. I don't know that we'll get to all of them, but I'm going to definitely hit the first couple here. So this example is Amazon. So they were doing a Twitter poll, which is through that organic space, and you can poll your followers, and you'll get the results after like a 24-hour window. You can set that time frame. And what I would do for this, I love the idea. I think it's great to ask your users, what do you think of X, and get those results without paying for a huge research project. This is kind of a quick win. So what I would do is I would produce user-generated content from these polls, or if you're doing a survey or a contest, and incorporate that language into your ad copy. So for them, if they find that most of their users are calling this game bags instead of cornhole, I would incorporate that into my ad copy. So if you are getting that sense and that those results from your users, why not use it in your ad? I mean, it makes sense. You're speaking their language.
Jeri, have a question on this one, and it's, so as you think about a technique like this in terms of better lead generation or loyalty, how do you move from that vote into getting them further down the funnel is what the question is asking. So I guess what they're saying is that when you look at something like this, it's easy to see how you can get an engagement because it's right there in your feed. It's easy. You press it and you hit vote. But then how do you move beyond that? What are the next steps in terms of using that not just as an effective ad, but for better lead generation or getting additional engagement with that individual?
Yeah, no, I think that's a great point. So for this example, they did drive back to Amazon where the listings for the game actually, were present. So it's more consumer focused. For the B2B side, I would say, definitely driving your user, your customer, potential customer, to a page where they can gain more information. So, not everyone is going to be ready to purchase from social. It does take time, and it doesn't happen overnight. So we need to build on that awareness and educate them, and then drill them down into the site. So you should think about that experience, up front. What does that look like? What am I going to do following, this poll or this piece of content? Is there an opportunity to, send them an email? Can I get them into my database? And thinking about that process up front, I think is very beneficial. And I agree, if it is lead gen, drive the user to a page where, they can get, maybe it's signing up for, a free, a free cornhole set. For every person that chooses cornhole, if this could be dynamic, sending them to that landing page and asking, them to fill out a little, customer card, they get a free set of cornhole bags. Something like that, Now again, that's giving away a product and it's consumer, but you can see on the flip side for B2B, it's offering maybe a white paper, offering a whiteboard Friday that is paid only or something. There's tactics that you can do to keep them engaged over time.
Apparently, beanbag toss is a hot topic among our audience here. Had a couple questions, and I guess they're reacting to kind of the share button sold here. If somebody shares or retweets basically your sponsored content, how do you factor that into your cost equation? So in other words, is it ringing the cash register every time it gets shared and posted, or how is that factored in?
Oh, another great question, Steve. So anytime a social engagement happens from a paid or sponsored post, the advertiser actually doesn't pay for it unless it is your objective. So let me kind of clarify that a little bit more. So when I run a campaign for a client, our objectives are either to drive a user back to the website or to watch a video. There are some instances where you might have a new app and you are looking for users to download your app. That's not the typical. The norm is to drive back to a website or to watch a video. In those two cases, an advertiser is only paying when a user clicks through to your website or watches the video. And the social channels actually have been optimizing the videos and for advertisers specifically, because of course a question could be, well, I'm just rolling through my Twitter feed and a video automatically plays. They have narrowed that cost down, and so you're only paying if someone views it in the full screen mode and for 3 seconds at least. So there's little things that they're working on, but a video is cheaper than paying for someone to click through to a website too. So there's disadvantages and advantages to both of those. But yeah, I mean, it's actually very beneficial to gain replies and comments from users, which you have to be open to when you're running paid ads. People retweeting and sharing your content to their followers, that also helps amplify your content and really ultimately helps your branding and everything about it. So that's one of the benefits that I always talk to my clients about.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to share this example. It's from Salesforce. So they acquired Quip, which helps companies organize their work and allows employees to collaborate a little bit easier, maybe through spreadsheets and kind of keeping everything in one environment. So they acquired them, and they tweeted the news to their followers. And it's great that they were alerting their followers, but what about people who are not following them? What I would do is I would target followers of Quip and professionals in LinkedIn who either work for Quip or who maybe in the past have worked with Quip. So we can dive into that information a little bit more and turn that business verbiage into something relatable. So how about talking about the benefits for Quip users? Are they now, what are they getting with this Salesforce acquirement? Is it now 24-hour customer service? Is it a new arm to the business? What is it that benefits Quip customers that are now being transitioned to Salesforce? And I would absolutely include a call to action here that encourages that target audience to contact their new rep or to get in touch with us to set up your new account. There are so many ways that you could take this organic content and move it in a paid space that really works for that audience. You're speaking directly to them. Great.
The other question we've got about this repackaging and reusing is really about events. How can we use what we're creating in terms of promotions, events, activities at trade shows, and really leverage that content in paid ads?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's a great segue into this example because it was event-based. So this is a company, Dialogue Tech. It's a company that I follow for kind of industry stuff. So their goal here was to get customers to register for this event with great food, cocktails, and conversion optimization. How could you not want to go? So my recommendation for them, this was an organic post. First and foremost, they are calling out that the event is in Atlanta. So personally, I would love for them to target people in Atlanta or in the vicinity. That's another key feature of some of these channels. You can do mile radius targeting, so why not do 50 miles from Atlanta? Maybe people will travel for this awesome event. So that's first and foremost. Secondly, I think retargeting users that abandon the registration form. And that can also be a sign-up form. It doesn't have to be for an event. It can be for any type of trigger like that. So, for me, if I was here and I went to, let's say I was on my way home on my mobile phone, and I click through to the registration form, I'm entering, and then I get a call from someone, and I take the call, and I really never make it back to complete the registration. Now you have an opportunity to retarget me because I was interested. I just left. So I think that's an open door right there.
Yeah, that tends to be something that a lot of communicators do. For those of you who haven't yet shared, just a reminder that the Q&A box is open. We are taking questions. If you're at full screen, you may have to minimize it to get to the Q&A box, but we have had a nice steady stream of questions coming in around events and those type of things. I'd say, Jeri, with the time we have left, if you could actually jump and talk a little bit about just tying in the cohesive campaigns, and we can get some of these questions we have in the queue.
Yeah, absolutely. I mentioned this before when someone asked about what impacts budgets on, these different channels. And I mentioned that customer experience and thinking, up front, what is it that we're going to do and how are we going to keep them engaged throughout this 6-month campaign? I wanted to, I was thinking about this, getting fit, right? It's the end of the summer, we're coming up on fall, the holidays. And thinking about someone who's working out, going to a gym, you do need the right tools to help you get fit. And gyms are mapped out in certain ways. And that's great for people who are physically there. But then when they leave the gym, how do we get in touch with them next? Are we emailing them to alert them of new classes? Are we sharing information about, success stories? Do we have an app where they can record their exercise and the time that they've run? All of these elements keep people engaged, and it's, multidimensional. So it can be video, it can be, like I said, email, and we're taking it to different devices. And mobile's really, really important. Even though I find traditionally and still today, majority of B2B companies see their incoming traffic as desktop users. That's still common. However, mobile is growing, and I've had clients in the last 2 years see it double. So it's an indicator that it is coming around to the B2B space, where B2C has been quicker to adopt. So it's not to say that you have to have an app. It's just, I want to reiterate that we need to think about the mobile experience versus the desktop experience. And, there's different ad formats to help that. So I mentioned Facebook having those different formats. If you need to, set up 2 different campaigns to target desktop users versus mobile users. The look and feel is different. So, I definitely think that that's key. And yeah, you've got my takeaways up here. So really to just wrap up and summarize, find the right channel for your business. You don't need to be on every channel. Even if you have an organic presence, the paid space is there for you if you find that your audience is there and that you can target people. Take advantage of the content and creative you already have. If you have a video that you developed, for a trade show, you can absolutely leverage that for a paid ad. You may have to shorten it, and you may have to change the formatting, but that's at a minimal cost to creating an entirely new video. And then think through the entire customer journey. I just mentioned that about, leading users, from an ad to your website and then drilling down into that funnel. And how are we going to drive people down? Think about the content that would support that at the awareness stage, at the consideration stage, and then when they're ready to buy, what kind of information do those users need to get to that next level?
So, Jeri, a couple of questions that we have coming in here actually are on a couple different sides of the issue. One is, I'm in an industry that has traditionally not done a lot in this area. I'm in the construction market. It's been a fairly limited audience. What recommendations do you have for me, and how do I convince senior management we should spend in this area? Nice, easy softball for you.
Yeah. So first and foremost, I think to get buy-in, you really need to showcase that there's an audience there. And that's usually where we start in the research process. So if you don't have a business account per se, you can go through your personal account and just walk through the steps as an advertiser to get to that admin space where you then ultimately see how you can target people. So I would highly recommend anybody go do that. Look at at Twitter ads and just go through your personal account. You don't have to put in a credit card or anything, and you don't have to mock up anything, but at least to get a sense for who's on that channel in your industry. One thing that you can do for Facebook specifically is in the behaviors and interest section is just start, open typing construction. Or if there's specific areas that you're looking to reach, just open forum, open type and see what comes up, because there's so many hobbies, interests, and behaviors and company information there. I deal with this a lot where, traditionally, our users aren't on, these social channels, or they're not interested in business information. That's absolutely not true, because people indicate it all the time.
So Jeri, a question from almost the opposite end, which is, I'm in a highly regulated industry where lawyers have to sign off on everything. What tips do you have for making this a more seamless process?
That is one that I deal with a lot as well. It makes sense. We have to have everything dotted and crossed before we move forward with anything. So if you are working on a traditional plan and it's already gone through legal, that's one step, right? It's already taken, the action of being completely crossed off by everybody saying this is good to go. So you take that content that you've already had approved and you reshape it for these different channels. And, for Twitter, we've got to narrow it down to 140 characters. So how can I express what I'm trying to share and get them to take action in 140 characters. So you really do need to spend some time slicing and dicing, this more traditional content into, a little short space. But that's one area is, you already have the cross off from them. The other piece is, you might have to share with them, what the output looks like. When I mention, some of these, like I went through this organic content, take a look at your own feed and see what these sponsored posts look like. And you might just have to share, this is what they look like. This is what people are going to see. If you have, a product that needs a trademark, you could include it. And you can always drive them to a landing page that also has legal on it. It's the same with contests and sweepstakes. We always have to include that for our clients too on that landing page. So I hope that helps, because I think that's the case for a lot of companies. Most companies do have a legal department. So. Great.
And we have time for one more question. For those of you whose questions we have not been able to get onto on this call, we will follow up with you. But the last question, Jeri, is, does the B2B customer journey differ from the B2C journey? And if so, how should I use my mix of paid search and social advertising differently for these two avenues?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would say for the B2B space with that customer journey, what I've seen traditionally is that a lot of people are in that consideration mode versus, consumer, where it tends to be a lot of branding and awareness, because you're competing against really high-performing competitors, right, who have budgets that are exploding. Where in the B2B space, we are talking about smaller budgets and really trying to reach a specific person. So if you think about that, the decision, group, how can we move people, further into that buyer's mode? I would really look at the content that you're supplying to that user, and use all of this as data for yourself. So even if you do have a small budget and you're only running on one channel, use that to your advantage. You're able to see what people are relating to. Maybe it's a theme and topic. Maybe it's an image. Maybe it's a video. And really, I guess, emulate that. If if you're trying to drive them, how can maybe they just need to see what it looks like. So maybe a visualization of how they can use your product. Maybe that would be better. Or if you have a service, giving them that open forum to ask questions. Maybe that's it. So that's kind of how I think of it. Is there anything differently from your end for that customer journey?
No, I mean, I think it really goes back to the basis of what are you trying to achieve in that campaign, kind of what you had talked about, the low and slow or the fast and accelerated, and really targeting it based on what makes sense. Because I think overall the journey is the same. The biggest difference is, Your consumer sale tends to be a little bit more of a compressed time frame because in most cases the emotional investment and financial investment is not the same as a lot of these larger B2B investments. So, but that will also give us the opportunity that as we think about the next steps in the series, today has been a good one to really kind of talk about one of the aspects that really is fairly new for a lot of marketers and communicators, which is how do you tie in paid search and social? Because traditionally that's been either marketings or just the digital agencies, but you know, as we covered with that peso model, it is a core part of what we have there. Hope you'll join us next week. Next week we're going to take a look at this more from the standpoint of campaigns and how do you integrate social media activities in there? How do you increase that experience? We just ran some market research, so we're going to have some fresh findings to share with you then. And then on the 31st, we'll be talking about really kind of the heart of your digital engine, which is the website, and how to really use that in lead gen. So we thank everyone for all of the questions that you had throughout the day and for staying with us. If you have additional questions, please feel free to respond directly to me or to Jeri, and we will try and answer your questions as soon as then. So thank you very much, everybody. Have a wonderful day, and thanks for joining.
Thanks, Steve.